Welcome to Eyes on Books. This week we have a treat with us. We have our author who lives in the local area come and visit instead of talking to her on the TV. So I want to introduce you to Nicola.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, Harrison. And she wrote a wonderful book called Hotel Laguna. It's a historical novel, and I think most of you readers will really enjoy reading this. So let's get started with a little bit about the book. You want to ask the first question, Jonathan?
Well, the first question is, where is the book set? We know, but it's very important to the story.
Yes. This book is set in Laguna Beach, California, in 1946, right after World War II.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love it. I love Laguna Beach. And look, be honest, this area, this community is called Laguna Woods.
Yes.
But we're so close to Laguna Beach that my wife said for just years and years and years, it's my beach home.
Yeah.
We don't really live there, but it's a wonderful place, and the history is there.
Yes.
We've been coming for a long time. The Hotel Laguna itself is a landmark. Mm-hmm. It's still there.
Yep. An iconic building.
It's very much an iconic building.
My question to you is, this takes place during World War II,
Yes.
and then after, when Hazel, the main character in this, one of the main characters in this book, arrives in Laguna Beach. Mm-hmm. Now, my question to you is, the background of her being one of the Rosie the Riveters, okay, in this book, I know it's a factual book. Have you had anyone in your family work during the time of World War II as a riveter that you knew so much about?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
I did.
Really? I didn't
realize.
realize.
Yes. So like you said, this is about Hazel Francis, and in 1946, and she's moved from Wichita, Kansas, to Los Angeles, California, to work at Douglas Aircraft as one of the Rosie the Riveters. And so when I first started doing my research about this, I read about the 6 million women who worked on the home front during World War II, building airplanes, working in shipyards, ammunition plants, all to help with the war effort. And I became fascinated with these women, and I mentioned it to my husband one evening that I was reading about them, and he was like, "Oh yeah, my grandma Ruth was a Rosie the Riveter."
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Greg, I write historical fiction for a living. How did I not know that Grandma Ruth was a Rosie the Riveter?" And I never got the chance to meet her, but she'd already passed away. But I immediately got on the phone with my mother-in-law and got all the stories of her life and that time of her life, and it was just so interesting. So she was an inspiration for the character of Hazel.
Oh, okay, because there was a lot of detail in there that I knew about. My mother was also well, she wasn't a riveter. She was a lieutenant in recruitment for nurses.
Yes.
But her friend was a riveter.
Okay.
She was one of the first 10 riveters that they had hired.
Oh, wow.
So when I read all the detail about that, I says, no, she has to have somebody inside that knew these details.
You know, friend, you're so right, because the book has those details about what it was like, and it's almost like firsthand. What I enjoy about the book so much is you really experience what goes on through the eyes of Hazel. And the experience seemed very real to me. Of course, I have no direct awareness what that was like.
But I also, in addition to Grandma Ruth, I also discovered through my research an American Rosie the Riveter Association that has chapters all over the country. And their whole mission is to preserve their legacy of these women who'd worked these jobs, to get their stories written down. And I was introduced to some women in the Orange County chapter at a senior living home in Anaheim. So I got to meet 3 Rosie the Riveters. There was Helen, Phyllis, and Rusty. And so they got to tell me all about their jobs, and they had worked all over the country, not just in LA. And one of them had been a riveter. One of them had worked in the nose of the aircraft, because she was so petite she could get in there and do a little wiring and everything.
Wow.
And one of the others told me she worked the hydraulic press, which is like a huge machine that comes down and presses the...
That was Rusty, probably.
You're probably Rusty, yes.
Yeah, you did actually include them in the book.
Yes.
I know you did.
Yes.
I'm familiar with their stories.
I love the name Rusty. I'm like, I got to put that in the book.
You had to put that in the book.
Yes.
Now, the other part of the book was when she arrived in Laguna Beach.
Yes.
And the detail back in 1946 when she arrived, compared to now, of course, there's a big difference. But the street names are the same.
Yeah.
And the hotel.
Right.
But how the people behaved and acted during that time was really something.
Right.
Because it still is an artist colony. And it's, that part of it is still pretty closed. And for her to be here, to come, and she was pretty naive, I think, you know, and she was thrust into a situation where she had to mature really fast. But when she came to Laguna, she was just so, how can I put it, inhibited?
Right, yes.
That's the best word to put it.
That's true.
Inhibited. It took the town and the artist, Sir Radcliffe, who is, I looked up, is a real artist.
Well, kind of. He's fictional, but he's loosely based on other artists of the time.
Well, there is a Radcliffe from that time.
Okay, yes.
Okay, so I looked that up. But the thing is that until she really met him, did she start to blossom as a woman.
Yes.
And that was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that part. Now, that part with the artistry, how did you delve into that? I don't want to get to the pageant yet.
Right,
we'll get to the pageant later.
So I started writing this book in the middle of COVID in 2020. I had turned in my manuscript from my last book, The Showgirl. It was time to start thinking about what to write next. And I was living in New York City at the time.
Right.
And I thought to myself, well, usually at this stage of the game, I would want to travel to the place that I want to write about, go to the library, do some research, interview some of the locals. But of course, I couldn't do any of that. So I thought, where do I want to live in my imagination for the next year or 2 years or however long it takes to write this next book? And I kept coming back to the idea of Laguna Beach because I have a lot of fond memories of being here. I lived here right after college in Laguna. And then also both of my parents are artists. And so my dad does oil paintings and my mom does watercolors, and they've exhibited in some of the galleries and festivals in Laguna Beach. Not the Pageant of the Masters, but the Festival of the Arts, which is across the
It was almost home.
the art affair across the street. Exactly.
It was almost home.
So through them, I knew I had met some of their quirky, artist friends, and I thought, ooh, there'd be good characters to put into this book.
Okay, so there is some factual stuff worked in here. I thought so, the way the book is written.
The thing that I enjoyed about Hazel is she has a very unique but very, very special personality. She is brave. She has the courage of her convictions.
Right.
She's excited by things.
Yes.
She's open. She doesn't try to solve all the problems. She just faces them head on.
Right.
And the way she shows up in Laguna Beach and finds the community, it takes her a while.
Yes, to break
integrate
into
herself,
the community.
to break into that community.
Yeah.
But I just admire her so much, her personality.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I felt she jumped to conclusions, though, in a lot of things. When the attorney wanted to speak with her, she fled. When this wasn't going right, she fled. But let's get to the Pageant of the Masters.
Yes.
Now, I know the pageant started before World War II.
Yes.
1932, I believe it was, after the World's Fair? The Olympics.
The Olympics.
After the Olympics in L.A.
The L.A. Olympics. The artists in Laguna Beach knew about the Olympics going on, and they were like, hey, there's all these tourists and visitors going to L.A. How do we get them to come down to Laguna and see our art? And so they opened their studio doors, and they started putting on a little show. And I imagine the first one, from what I read, the first show was sort of like a picture frame with someone sort of posing behind it, maybe like the Mona Lisa or something. Like an amateurish show. And then Roy Ropp, who's the father of the Pageant of the Masters, got involved, and all the other artists got involved, and it became more and more professional each year. And it's been going on for 90 years.
I know. Yeah. It started with in August for 1 week.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the only time that it hasn't run in all of those 90 years are the 4 years during World War II, because of course you couldn't have large gatherings and lights and everything. And for 2020. For COVID.
For COVID.
Other than that, it's run every single year.
Continuously.
I was interested in the way they said they found the costumes, but they were moldy and they were damaged, and they had to gather up cloth because after World War II there wasn't a lot around.
Right.
So she was gathering up curtains
Yes.
and gathering tablecloths, and they were recreating the costumes,
which they preferred because to recreate the paintings, the older fabrics looked better and more authentic. They didn't want to go out and buy some brand new red fabric because it looked too new.
Right.
Yes.
One of the things that surprised me, in the book, they refer to what we now know as Pacific Coast Highway as South Coast Highway.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of that. It wasn't always called Pacific Coast Highway.
Yeah, and the other thing that I included in the book that is different from now, and I even put it in as a note in the back because sometimes readers will be like, that's not what that is now, is where the boardwalk is now at Main Beach in Laguna. That all used to be built up with shops and restaurants and a dance hall. And at some point in the 1960s, some of the community got together and they said, hey, this is like blocking our view of this beautiful ocean.
Yes.
And so they bought that land, they knocked down those buildings, and that's why it's all open now until behind PCH. So I thought that was interesting too. But in the book, the buildings are there, the dance hall is right there.
Let me ask you something. In your books, there's an interest in his history, but also an interest in performance. In the Ziegfeld story,
Yes.
That's a major aspect of the whole story. And here we have art. So I'm curious, what leads you to have an interest in those sorts of areas?
That's a good question.
Another thing I must say, the book, I'm hoping, I'll say this right away, I hope they make a movie of it.
Oh, me too.
I really, you know what?
It would be really nice, or even a TV show, a little series,
Yeah.
which
I want
would
to see
be nice.
the series, the Hazel series.
Right.
She's amazing. She's an interesting character.
Yes.
You could do so much with her just as a character.
Yes.
You could put her through season 1, season 2, season 3.
From your mouth to Hollywood's ears.
Yes, really. And you also write in a quite cinematic style, which I enjoy.
Oh, thanks. I think the performance aspect that you mentioned earlier is, I didn't even realize it, I'm just thinking of it now, but I mean, I think it's from my upbringing, because my parents and their art background, and then when I was growing up, I did dance, and so maybe that's where it came from, but it wasn't like a conscious decision. I think the ideas for books come to you, and you don't even really know why.
So you did dance.
I did, yes.
I know that features in your other story.
You're right, the showgirl.
The showgirl.
Yes.
I started that already.
Oh, okay.
Haven't gotten too far, but I started that.
I
Ziegfeld.
downloaded that. I downloaded that to read it. I didn't get to it yet.
It's so vivid. It's part of American history. One of the things I treasure about your book is it reminds me of, well, I was born in 1946. Not quite that era. I was just an infant, but it does remind me of, when I look back with a bit of nostalgia.
Right.
Oh, it was a simpler time.
It was a simpler time.
It was simpler.
Yeah.
People pulled together. There was a sense of community.
Yes.
That really features prominently in my understanding, but it also comes up in your other books, I think.
Yeah.
It evokes an era that's past, but worth recalling, worth sharing.
Oh, good. So one of the best parts of my research for this book was when I was finally able to get into the Laguna Beach library, and the restrictions for COVID had lifted, and I was finally able to get in there. And I had been emailing back and forth to the librarian there, Nelda, and she had been helping me out as much as she could over email, sending me articles or answering questions. But when I finally walked in there, she came out with a little box, and she said, I've been putting some things aside for you that might come in handy. And one of the things was the original brochure from 1946 from the Pageant of the Masters.
Oh,
wow.
And I was like, you just had this hanging around in the bag?
That's terrific.
And it was more like a magazine than an actual pamphlet. And so it had articles of the behind the scenes of the Pageant of the Masters and how they put on the show and the makeup and the costumes.
Well, they do that now.
Yes, it was so amazing. But the best part of it, the most helpful for me, was all the advertisements from the local businesses that were in the magazine, because then I was able to think, okay, well, where would my characters go out dancing, and where might Hazel and Jimmy go to dinner, and I could use. I love incorporating real places in the book whenever I can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
One place was Victor Hugo's restaurant, which was where Las Brisas restaurant is now, that sort of area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's,
That's nice.
Yeah,
That's
very nice.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, I go, I don't remember Victor Hugo. I've been living out here that long.
yeah, a lot of the places are gone now.
Oh,
So there are a
yes.
few that are still around. But,
Definitely that's still around. Yeah.
At least the street names, some of the street names are the
yes,
same.
yes, and of course the beaches.
Oh, yeah.
And the Victoria Beach with
Right.
the castle little building.
So, did your parents at all influence you when it came to portraying Radcliffe?
No, not really.
Not really,
But I
okay.
definitely read about and researched some of the artists of that time,
Right.
the California Impressionist movement. You know, they're very inspired by the California sunlight and the way it might make a palm tree look purple or the ocean look, you know, orange, and so they would paint it the way they saw it. And so I was inspired by the artists of that time, and there was an artist called Hanson, and there was a Hanson something, and there was an artist called something Radcliffe, and but I created him as a fictional character because I didn't want to be so tightly tied to a real person, because then I wouldn't have the flexibility to have them do certain things.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right,
You did make a very interesting character,
Yes.
and much of the drama that takes place in the book is between Hazel and Hanson,
Yes.
and how they interact and what they do for each other. It's a very moving
Right.
thing.
Yes.
It makes you wonder at the start, is this ever going to work out?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And yet,
Yes.
it ends up to be really the heart of the story.
Right. I would agree with
There's
that.
a love
yes.
story in it, which is touching, but you knew from the minute you introduced Jibby, tall and broad-shouldered. The minute she said that in the book.
That's a love interest.
It's going to go that direction for
Yes,
sure.
but Hanson Radcliffe, he's haunted by a scandal from his past,
Right.
Yes.
involving a Hollywood starlet that Hazel becomes intrigued with, and she sort of enlists Jimmy, the Hanson bartender, to help her figure out what that's about. So she gets caught up in that as well. So that's fun.
You may have to sell just that concept to Hollywood. It's really, really brilliant. That the artist and the emotional turmoil between the star and the artist.
Right.
That's a very dramatic core
Yeah.
idea that you played with wonderfully
Oh,
in the
thank
story.
you. Yeah.
Really get to feel what was going on with it. It made me wonder, what was this really like? What was that relationship like? And why does he carry it with him
Right.
for decades?
For so long. Yeah.
For decades
yes,
afterwards.
Yes, as people do, right?
And how you resolved it, I thought was marvelous.
Oh, good.
That was an interesting way to resolve that conflict. That he, well, I don't want to give too much
Don't give it away.
No,
No
don't give it
spoilers.
away. Don't give it away.
But what happens at that point in the story is remarkable and inspiring, I think.
And how the starlet goes after him
Yes.
Yes.
to have him paint her.
Right,
You know,
right.
that was, I could picture it going on
Oh,
today.
good,
Yes,
yes.
I could. But yeah, I just thought the book was great.
Oh, thank
It was
you.
really good.
Thank you.
I'm going to read your other book, Showgirl. And then
Okay.
there's another one called Montauk.
Montauk. Yeah, that was my
Yes.
first book. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And I gather that's from New York.
Yes.
As
yes.
you can tell by my accent, that's where I'm from.
Yes, okay, so you know
Yeah.
Montauk. I always
Uh-huh.
wonder in California, do people have heard of Montauk? But,
Oh, yeah, Montauk Point.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yes. And the lighthouse.
And the lighthouse out there, right?
Yeah.
You're right.
Nicole, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your writing, your method of writing, the way you do it. I kept thinking as I was reading, as you writing, I'm curious about that, what goes on. I think you get pulled in a certain direction. I'm curious, what pulls you? As the story develops,
Yeah.
I know that something is pulling you about Hanson.
Right.
Where does that need to go? What is your writing style? Because a number of people who live here in the village do write or
Right.
aspire to write.
Yes, I'm
I
sure
think
a
it
lot
would be
of
very
stories.
interesting to hear from an author.
Okay.
What's that process like?
So for me, there seem to be two different kinds of writers that I meet along the way. There's the pantsers, which are the fly by the seat of your pants, and then there are the plotters who plot it all out and they know exactly what they're going to write before they even write a word on the page. And I'm somewhere in the middle.
I think so. I think you're in the middle.
And so I like to know, generally where the story's going. I like to know where it's going to begin, kind of what's going to happen in the middle. I usually know what will happen at the end, although things could change. But that's about it. And then I just go. And the reason I like writing like that is because it allows for other things to happen, other characters to come in that I may not have expected. And I remember hearing an author speak before I wrote a book, and they said, "Oh, you know, my books just take on a life of their own." And I was like, "Really? You're the one typing the words. Like, does that really happen?" But it does.
Yeah.
And I've had characters in books who I thought were just going to sort of have a walk-on role and, you know, a very small role and then leave. And then I liked them so much, or they had such a good connection with the main character that they ended up having a bigger role, or, you know, and so it's a lot of fun to allow for that flexibility for things to happen that you may not have expected.
I'm curious, did Scarlett surprise you?
Yes. Scarlett, I didn't think I thought she was just going to be, she was exactly what I just said. I thought she was just going to come in and leave, but she had a big presence, and I liked her. She had to stay.
Yeah, I think so.
Her way in.
That's kind of what I meant by what pulls you.
Right.
I get the sense when you introduced her, you look at, you kind of pulled at you a little bit.
Right, So it's fun.
What is she up to?
Yeah, you don't always know what's going
to
happen the next day when you're writing.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good. And that's what makes a good book. You know, where it's not all set out and you say, "Oh, I read this and I know at the end it's going to be a happily ever after."
Right.
You know, so that's what also holds your interest, is the way it flows.
I do have writer friends who map everything out, every single chapter, every single scene, everything. And I do think that sounds like a very sane and civilized way to write. They open up their laptop in the morning and they refer to their document and they say, "Oh, this is the scene I'm going to write today." But that's just not the way my mind works.
No, a creative mind doesn't really work like that.
Right, not for me.
Yeah.
You get that pull, as they say. Just, I got to move this direction.
Yes.
This is what's happening.
Right.
This is what's taking place.
That's what keeps it fun, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So how long did it take you to write the book? I was just curious.
This book took me about a year and a half, probably 2 years by the time I did edits and everything. Yeah.
Are you a disciplined writer? Do you get up in the morning and you write between this time and this time?
Pretty much. I write when my kids are at school.
Yeah.
Drop them off at school. I come back. I know I have until like 3.
Okay.
And I write in those hours. And it kind of helps to know that you have a cutoff time. Like, I think if I had all the time in the world, I probably would think about it too much and dilly-dally, but I'm like, okay, I've only got a few hours, but I get to work.
I'm really curious now. I've only read the first 3 chapters of the Showgirl book. I'm curious, what draws you into that world, the theater world?
I'm always drawn to write strong female characters.
Yes.
And however I get into the story, that's always tends to be the main character.
Yeah.
For that book, I actually had no intention of writing about a showgirl on Broadway. I was planning on writing about a place in upstate New York that I had learned about, that had a lot of history. And I learned, during that research, I learned that one of the owners of this building, it used to be kind of like a hotel, a camp up in the Adirondacks. I learned that one of the original owners and his wife was a Ziegfeld Folly, and that she used to bring all of her eccentric Broadway colleagues out to the Adirondacks to have these wild parties, and I was like, that's my girl right there. So it's usually that's how I find my way into the story.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's good.
And things tend to go, and then things went in a totally different direction.
Well, right now, I would advise our readers, especially there's book clubs here in Laguna Woods, to get a whole copy of Hotel Laguna, because I think it's really interesting. It's very good.
Especially if you live, especially if you live here in this area, Laguna.
Yeah.
It's a treasure. You learn so much about the history, and we live it here. We walk down to the beach and
You'll
enjoy
recognize
that. The greeter, the whole story
yes,
there.
Yes, the greeter, the hotel, you recognize the place.
You really do bring it to life.
Oh, thank you so much.
Let me ask you, what advice would you give a writer who would like to maybe perhaps write a story?
Yeah.
A simple story.
One of the best things that has helped me all through my writing career so far is being part of a writing group. I am in a writing group that is actually in New York, because we used to meet in person, but now I Zoom into it. But I think, whether it's just a handful of people who also are writing, or whether it's an official writing class, I think it's so helpful to be able to share your work on a regular basis. So for me and my writing group, every week we each share 7 pages of our work. And it's rough and it's messy and it's not perfect yet, but it just keeps you on track, so you're not going off down a rabbit hole, and they'll give me feedback and say, oh, that doesn't feel believable, and I'm able to reel it in before I go too far off in the wrong direction. And I just find that that feedback really helpful. So I would advise for anyone wanting to write a book to get a group together of a few people, or maybe even an online class, and just have that, build a little community around it.
Well, that's very good. Now I'm going to ask you another question.
Yeah.
What's your next book coming about, and when is it coming out?
Yes. So my next book is also a California-based novel, and it takes place on Balboa Island in Newport Beach. Yeah. In the 1950s. And it's coming out in the spring of 2026.
Okay.
And this book is about 3 women who don't know each other in the beginning of the book. There's a hassled young mother who is has just moved to the island. There's a society matriarch lady who everyone knows and loves, who's sort of struggling for her own personal reasons. And then there's a disgraced former tennis champion who's living on the island as a recluse. And these 3 women don't know each other at the beginning of the book, but then their lives come together. Their lives are all falling apart in different ways, but they come together and help each other out. And so
Well, that sounds
exciting.
interesting.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, yeah.
I know you're from England originally.
Yes.
And it seems like all your books are based in California, so I gather you enjoy the California and New York life.
Yes, now that I live.
too.
Yes, now that I live in California, I enjoy writing California books because it's so fun to be able to go to the places and do research, and then after the book comes out, to be able to go and talk to people, book clubs and libraries where people know and love the places that I've written about. So it's a lot of fun.
And I gather Showgirl is from...
Yes, so Showgirl takes place in New York City, and I was living there
And
at
you
the
were
time.
living in New York, yes.
And then my first book, Montauk, takes place in Montauk, Long Island, and I used to have a house there as well. So it's usually places that I selfishly know and love and want to delve into and write about.
Good. That's good, because you have a feeling for the area too,
Yes.
which makes it really important.
Right.
It does.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate your coming over and sharing us, giving us information about the book. And,
Thank you. Thanks so much for having
yourself.
me.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you for joining us today on Eyes on Books, Video Club of Laguna Woods. See you next time.